Hello and welcome to the Yak, the Yards After Catch podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Josh Shepardson at Beachhead 50, talking about wide receiver analysis, of course. And as always, or not as always, but as the last few weeks, the wide receiver piece is your great piece of content here, talking about the top options. And obviously, this top guy, it's another one. It's almost like a Rob Gronkowski at tight end situation where we say, you need to be playing this guy. You need to know who he is. And if you have not been playing DeAndre Hopkins, chances are your bankroll's been taking a big hit. He's averaging 15 targets a game. He's on pace for just shattering tons of records of receiving. Brian Hoyer loves him. His price has creeped up, and you see a big price increase with players like him a lot of times, and you get hesitant. But that's not the case with me with Hopkins. He was the first guy I clicked into my cash game lineup, and he'll be the first guy I click into most of my GPP lineups as well.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a pretty popular sentiment in the DFS industry here this week. I mean, $9,200 is not the easiest dollar amount to budget for on FanDuel. 6 does remain pretty easy to budget for on DraftKings, especially when you can split cheap flex. And some of the top running backs this week, Todd Gurley, for instance, is very affordable. But you almost have to, in cash games, get this guy locked in, even at his top receiver price that finally lines up with the production. He's just been so good. He's remarkably consistent. He's getting targets every week. He's putting up yardage every single week. He's finding the end zone. He's doing everything you could want from your receiver and then some. And with Brian Hoyer taking over the reins at quarterback, that definitely is a boost to his value. Not that he wasn't performing with Ryan Mallett. I mean, look at his game logs. He's been phenomenal all year. But point being, Hoyer's been the better quarterback, and that's going to put this offense in better scoring positions, which elevates the floor and the ceiling for Hopkins.
Yeah, I mean he's arguably the toughest cover in all of football right now. So
yep.
It's an easy choice here. Get him in your lineups. Moving on to the next guy, Larry Fitzgerald. Everyone talking about Carson Palmer this week, and rightfully so, against that terrible Baltimore secondary. And Fitzgerald's price, like you mentioned here, just kind of remains at that upper mid-level type of price. Hasn't really crept up, even though he's been, outside of Hopkins, probably the most consistent receiver in all of football. Because I mean, we've even seen Julio Jones with a couple disappointing games. A lot of that due to an injury, but Fitzgerald, I mean, he looks like the old Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, he looks great. He and Palmer have great rapport, and there's no one to stop him in this secondary this week.
Yeah, and his season's just been something phenomenal because all this production's coming without the elite target totals of a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, Fitz barely cracks the top 20 in targets, yet he ranks in the top 5 and top 10 in all of the other major receiving categories. So he's doing this incredibly efficient. It's almost scary to think what could happen if Palmer just decides he's going to go tunnel vision one of these games to Fitzgerald, because we've seen big lines all year. The low for him this year is a 58-yard receiving effort on 5 grabs, and he caught a touchdown in that game. So, I mean, when that's your floor, you're talking about something special. And obviously, the ceiling is through the roof this week against a Baltimore secondary that just has been lost defending anyone and everyone. They've been very giving to receivers, and Fitz is clearly Palmer's best receiver. I won't say his most targeted. We did see John Brown go nuts last week, but I mean, Fitz is the guy there still. Brown is secondary, and then Michael Floyd is also a strong option. But point being, that this is Larry Fitzgerald's receiving core, and he is the number one for Palmer. And you want that against this poor secondary of Baltimore. And at his price, he is very easy to budget into lineups.
Yeah, and like we saw with the Bengals and Ravens, we saw A.J. Green versus Steve Smith, kind of a shootout between those two guys. I would not be shocked to see this be a Fitzgerald versus Steve Smith shootout. So that's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and it's a primetime game. So definitely get yourself some exposure, so you're not sitting there kicking yourself as we see the ball getting just chucked down the field on both sides.
Yep.
Donte Moncrief is next up. Andrew Luck returned last week from his injury. He looked good. I mean, I won't say he looked great, but he looked more than good enough to put up great numbers. And people worrying about a couple of throws that he missed, but you got to be encouraged by the fact that he didn't turn the ball over, which was really his main concern early in the season. And Moncrief is a guy who Luck loves. I mean, he trusts him down the field. He gets a decent amount of volume as well, and especially at his current price, This is the guy with a nice high floor, and I mean, we know he's got upside as well because he's not the only home run threat. We'll get to that other guy here in a minute, but this is still going to be a volume passing attack, and we're going to see plenty of looks for Moncrief.
Yeah, I mean, Moncrief has really emerged as their number 2 receiver there, and all the talk in the offseason and headed into the season was about Andre Johnson being the guy there. What he would do with a real quarterback for the first time in his career. Sorry, peak years, Matt Shaw, you still don't count.
Peak.
But yeah, but I mean, Johnson's been a disappointment. His lone bright spot on the year was basically coming out of zombie mode to beat on his old team for a couple touchdown grabs, and otherwise it's been Hilton and Moncrief leading the way every game, whether it's been Luck under center or Hasselbeck under center. But Moncrief has really clicked with Luck. They've played 4 games together this year. Donte Moncrief has caught a touchdown pass in all 4 games with Luck this year. He's been targeted 11 times in 2 separate games with Luck, the first game of the year and this last game against the Patriots. And I mean, he's getting the ball thrown his way a ton. He's a matchup nightmare. He's a big receiver. He's fast. He's a perfect complement to T.Y. Hilton, really, because Hilton is also a fast receiver, but he's on the smaller side. So Moncrief makes for that big red zone target, capable of making plays down the field and with the ball in his hands. So I do like Moncrief a lot, and his price just hasn't crept up to what his production's been, especially on DraftKings at just $5,200. He's very easy to slot in as a flex or as your wide receiver 3, and you can still spend up on guys like Nook and like Larry Fitzgerald and some of these other elite players, and really you're not skipping a beat by slotting in a guy like Moncrief.
No, not at all. I mean, you're really not sacrificing anything other than salary to get him in there, honestly. Next up, I'm not even going to say flavor of the week. I mean, this guy looks like he's for real. Stefon Diggs had a big-time game last week. Most of it in the first half. Second half, it kind of seemed like the Vikings were content to try to run out the clock, even though they weren't successful on the ground. Different story there, but I mean, they got it done, barely. But Stefon Diggs, I mean, now facing a Detroit secondary that has been one of the worst in all of football. I mean, I keep talking about Darius Slay, and my apologies to Darius Slay. I'm not saying I could play cornerback better, but my God, he's been terrible. And Stefon Diggs in another great spot. And Bridgewater isn't a guy that throws the ball a ton, but I mean, he's got. I'm not going to say tunnel vision, but I mean, he's looking at Stefon Diggs a ton. He's going to get plenty of looks. Even if Charles Johnson comes back, I'm not really concerned about that because, I mean, Diggs, he's produced, which is something that Charles Johnson has not done this year.
Yeah, and I mean, God, when you got 18 targets in a 2-game span, I'd say you got your quarterback's attention, and that's the case with Diggs. He's been a big play waiting to happen. He's caught 13 passes, and almost half of those, 6 of those receptions have gone for 20-plus yards. So get the football in his hands, and good things are going to happen, or at least that's been the case so far this year. And his FanDuel and DraftKings salary is great. I mean, there's a reason that he's in this value play section, and at $5,800, you shouldn't get that kind of talent at under $6,000 at receiver on FanDuel, and checks in at under $4,500 as a $4,200 option at DraftKings. So I do expect him to be semi-popular. The receiver position is super deep, though, and I have seen enough worrying, I guess you could say, in the community about the return of Johnson, about Mike Wallace, also, or I believe it said Mike Johnson. I mean Charles Johnson and Mike Wallace. I combined the 2 receivers, which if you could do that, would probably turn out to be a pretty good receiver. But yeah. I mean, I think that there are some concerns about. Within the community about the presence of the other 2 receivers, but I don't harbor the same concerns. I do hope it suppresses his ownership a bit because that would be ideal for those of us going out and using him as salary relief and as a guy that can play. I mean, he's been excellent so far. Yeah,
absolutely. And then I guess this guy kind of is the flavor of the week. First game return from suspension, Martavis Bryant for the Steelers. Thank God for anyone who wants to play him, and for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Michael Vick is out of there. Mike Vick, whatever you want to call him. He's been terrible. I heard people saying he couldn't complete a pass down the field. I mean, he didn't even try to complete passes because he was just so lost. Fortunately, he's missing this game. There is an outside chance, like you mentioned here, that Ben Roethlisberger comes back, which would, I mean, that's going to boost anyone's receiving stock in that. I mean, everyone gets a huge boost if Ben returns, and it's possible. I won't say it's likely, but either way, Landry Jones, like you mentioned here, also huge step up, and Martavis Bryant, I mean, he's a home run threat, and he got a decent amount of looks too. He's not just a deep ball threat.
Yeah, 8 targets in his first week playing this year. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that as a season-long owner of his. But that's a different story for a different day. But I mean, this Bryant last year was elite in terms of an efficiency standpoint last year in his rookie year. Unfortunately, we don't have the numbers to cite anymore because Pro Football Focus no longer allows the premium stats available to everybody. But just off of memory, Bryant was a top 5 receiver in terms of yards per route run amongst all receivers last year. So we're talking about elite company, the A.J. Greens and Julio Jones and Odell Beckham of the world. And that's what Bryant was capable of last year. He's had another offseason basically in the NFL and learning the system, learning what it means to be an NFL player. So obviously you can't expect him to keep up that kind of efficiency most likely, or maybe you can based on his first game. But point being, he's going to mature and improve as a receiver, and he already has the efficiency working in his favor, and he's a big target. I like his odds at having a good game better than Brown because Brown is a smaller receiver. He's an unbelievable receiver, but does require that touch, that magic that Big Ben has, that a guy like Andrew Jones probably doesn't. So get your big receiver, get your Martavis Bryant. He's a red zone threat, as we've seen through his young career so far, but he's also a big play threat. And I mean, look at that touchdown grab that I believe the final total was that he ran 130 yards to score that touchdown. That was what the StatCast had.
Unbelievable.
I mean, you get the ball in his hands, and he's going to do magical things.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, this is the week to target him, especially because if Big Ben comes back, we know he's going to be looking at his favorite receiver, Mr. Antonio Brown, a little bit more. So take advantage of this while you can. Not to say that Bryant won't be a viable play, but yeah, Brown's certainly going to be taking some away once Ben comes back. And I'm sure Antonio's going to be happy about that as well. T.Y. Hilton next up. Kind of already touched on this one. Going to be a volume passing attack once again. He's the other guy, which is interesting because he was originally, the number one, and he's technically still the number one, but still seeing a lot of looks. He and Moncrief both. Luck trusts him. A red zone threat as well, but this is a similar situation to Brown and Bryant kind of because Hilton is the smaller receiver, but he's also a guy that, he's got great hands, and Andrew Luck, trusts him. First downs, down the field, you name it. Andrew Luck loves this guy.
Yeah, and the really nice about this Colts offense is it is so pass happy. They've attempted 242 passes this year, and keep in mind that includes games with Matt Hasselbeck under center. Yeah. Rushed the ball 140 times. So 102 play discrepancy in favor of passing as opposed to rushing. So they're definitely airing the ball out plenty to feed to multiple receivers. And Hilton and Moncrief stand out as the clear top 2 target options in that offense. Both have touchdown scoring ability. Both have home run threat ability. And even though the Saints have been good against opposing receivers, they actually rank in the top half of the league in terms of preventing fantasy scoring for receivers. They rank 15th. I don't see them shutting down these receivers. They've given up a whopping 7.7 yards per reception to opposing per pass to opposing quarterbacks. I mean, they're getting torched. I'm not sure how the receivers aren't the ones doing that so far, but guys like Hilton and Moncrief can kind of buck that trend, I think, and take advantage of a game that highest projected scoring game of the week, and one that the spread isn't so big that you expect the Colts to just milk the game away. I mean, it's under a touchdown spread, so expect them to have to keep their pedal to the metal, so to speak, to get to net this victory. And so that's great for the passing game, and that's great for a guy like T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah, absolutely. And then your next guy, going to be a nice low-owned guy. We kind of were talking about his versatility for the show here. Jarvis Landry, a guy we've seen in jet sweeps. We've seen him running the ball. We've seen him line up in the backfield and take direct snaps. I mean, Landry is a guy that can kind of do it all. And this is a rejuvenated Miami offense and defense, really, under the new regime. So Landry, a guy that you mentioned here, going to fly way under the radar. But he's a guy that has solid upside. And, he's got a decent-sized floor as well because he does get a lot of looks in this offense. And the whole emergence of Lamar Miller, I don't think is taking anything away from him. If anything, it's going to make the defense respect the run more and open up more opportunities for Landry.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very fair point. And the thing that I really like about Landry is even with this reduced passing workload for Ryan Tannehill, we know who his number one target is. Yes, Rashard Matthews has looked good at times this year, but and he does lead the team in receiving yards, but it's Landry who leads the team in targets and receptions. He's a guy that's going to get the football in his hands, and anytime you can get a guy like Landry with the ball in his hands, he seems to have a nose for the end zone. He scored a rushing touchdown last week. He's got a punt return for a touchdown this year. I mean, he makes explosive plays, and you get explosive playmakers with the ball in their hands. Good things are going to happen from a reality perspective and from a fantasy perspective. And I mean, you look at his price, and he's affordable. 7,100 is a fair price on FanDuel. 6,200 is maybe even a little bit cheap on DraftKings. Can easily be budgeted for. But because he is priced on FanDuel, namely around a guy like Larry Fitzgerald, maybe you see him fly below the radar. I certainly don't think he's going to be high owned. I've got the ownership in GPP pegged at around 5% as a high end, maybe less than that. And I think that's probably going to hold true.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense there. And your final guy here, Willie Snead from the Saints. We kind of touched on this one as well, how this is going to be another volume passing attack, and like we've seen over and over. And Snead, a guy that was a popular play a few weeks ago. Then last week we saw Benjamin Watson have that huge game. I think you and I are on the same page in believing that was more of a fluke, more of a one-time type of performance. I mean, there's a reason Benjamin Watson is not a rookie. He's not a young player. He's been around forever. It's very few and far between you see a performance like that. So Snead should be able to take some of those looks back this week. And, Breeze looks like he trusts him down the field as well. We've seen him with some deep ball threat as well. So Willie Snead, a guy that should fly way more under the radar than I think he probably rightfully should this week.
Yeah, I mean, he's the leading receiver for the Saints right now in terms of yardage. Brandon Cooks and bests him in targets, and then you've got some dump-offs to Mark Ingram helping boost him up in the receptions category and knock Snead down to third on the team in receptions. But point being, Snead's been a very popular target for Drew Brees, and against a secondary that features Vontae Davis, who's excellent, one of the best cover corners in football, but also featured a number of below average, poor cornerbacks. And as Jason discussed in his article earlier this week, you'd expect Snead to not be blanketed by Vontae Davis. You'd expect him to draw one of those, the lesser corners. Maybe he'll see some Davis if Snead goes nuts and is picking them apart. But at that point, you've got your fantasy points in the bank. So if Vontae Davis ends up in lockdown coverage on Willie, it's probably because Snead was giving them fits and racking up fantasy points already. So, yes, you do have to be aware of Vontae Davis' presence because he is one of the better cornerbacks in the league. But the rest of the secondary is soft. The Saints are probably going to be playing catch-up. They are 4.5-point underdogs on the road in a game with a big total. And we know that Andrew Luck and the Colts are going to be airing it out. Expect Drew Brees and the Saints to be doing the same.
Yeah, I'm completely with you there. So make sure you target some of these plays and get DeAndre Hopkins into your lineups here. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Got lots of great content also at dailyfantasycafe.com.